Going on hashtag sports. Thanks so much for joining us, and we're excited to dig in here. Our module is all about how to build a social team for the modern age. My name is David Brickley, owner and CEO of a social first marketing agency, STN Digital. Tania, I'm gonna throw it to you to give yourself a proper intro.
Sure, absolutely. Hey, everybody, Tania Yuki, founder and CEO of Shareablee. We track the digital world, everything that's happening on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, etc. And we partner with creators and marketers to succeed across social.
I know the last session was all about women's sports, so I just want to shout out my On Her Turf. You guys should give it a follow. Women empowerment, women's sports. I know me and Tania are big fans, close to heart there. So definitely appreciate the last session. I wish I was in New York. I know you're in New York, Tania. Usually this hashtag is on stage in New York. It's a little more convenient. I'm here in San Diego to do it virtually, but after all this time,
Maybe in your pajama bottoms, maybe not.
Exactly. I'm not gonna stand up, promise. So yeah, so much has changed obviously in the last year and a half. And I know you and I live and breathe social, both data geeks at the end of the day as well. And I really want to dig in with you because what we wanted to bring to the listeners and the viewers today was just what approach you need to really build out a proper social team, what strategy you need. 2021 is a new frontier that we're going into. So I'm going to start with you. I have some thoughts here, but what has changed over the last year and a half in your world that you've seen or what we've learned? We saw digital advertising outpace traditional advertising for the first time ever in 2020. There's been a 12% increase in social media users. Gen Z spends 6 hours per day on social media. It's a pretty big deal if you're trying to reach that younger demo. But what have you seen shift in the industry the last year and a half?
Yeah, I mean, other than what you just pointed out, I think the position of social media platforms have become, they always were, in my opinion, but I think it sort of moved past that debate of, is Instagram going to persist or is it just a fad? Some of those things that were kind of floating around before, I think has pretty much been put to bed in the last year. I think the other really cool thing is, and this ties to something that we're going to talk about in this panel, is just access to talent, right? Like I think people are just widening their aperture of who they can hire, where they can hire. Anyone who was a little suspicious of the whole work from home has really moved through that. And I think it really sets up our industry for a kind of renaissance, if you will, of creativity and cross-pollination of ideas. And then lastly, the big thing that I'm excited about that I really hope will last, and people in sports, I think already kind of knew this, but I think many of the brands hadn't fully embraced it, was this concept of what is happening in society is happening to your brand and it's happening to your customers, even if it has nothing to do with your product. So, the social reckoning that we went through and a lot of the heightened awareness around, key social justice issues has really permeated a lot of, even basic communications. And that's great. And it always should have been there. And I think, I hope that that's something that we take with us beyond the pandemic.
Yeah, I talked to the CMO of Jersey Mike's right after March, probably April, May. And he shared with me that before the pandemic, pre-pandemic, delivery sales accounted for about 10% of their revenue. Overnight, it became 90% of their revenue. So thank God they had that digital infrastructure, right? And they invested in that delivery system so they can survive and not have to shut down stores and not have to potentially go bankrupt because of what they had to go through. And I think that's what I've noticed the most, Tania, is Fortune 500 brands all had to really look themselves in the face and say, A, where is our money going to? Where are we putting? We saw so many big brands pull out of the Super Bowl as well because, they figured it's a tough year. We can probably use this money in a more efficient way. So that's really interesting. But I think a lot of Fortune 500 brands, in my opinion, they knew social was important. They may have had a social strategy agency. They may have had a small team. But now, and I'm sure you agree with me, I mean, if you don't get this right, like now, like yesterday, you may be out of business in the next couple of years. So that's how I think this black swan event that was COVID has affected the social media market.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think also, there's so much talk in the press and in our industry of like Gen Z is like this hard to reach demographic. And you're like, no, it's hard to reach by you in the way that you are comfortable reaching your audiences, right? But to your point, 6 hours a day or whatever the number is on social. So they're being reached by something, just not in the traditional way. So there's a lot of, I think the way a lot of people have been describing is like 10 years of transformational change was compressed into a couple of months. And but it always should have happened. It was going to happen. It just really happened at a pace that maybe people wouldn't have chosen if they'd had that choice, but they didn't. So
yeah, here we are. I mean, I'm 34 years old. After school, I would run home to go catch TRL and MTV. That was kind of my thing. And these days, like, you're running home to TikTok. If not, you're on TikTok in between class and you're actually on that medium. You don't have to run home and wait for anything. So it's interesting. And I want to point out what you said about access to talent. I mean, every major celebrity on the planet now knows how to access a Zoom call, which seems simple in nature, but that's a pretty important part to our industry as well, where you can, I mean, Denzel Washington probably knows how to access his webcam and get some decent lighting and be on a virtual type of event. And that just opens up so much more opportunity, where before in social, you were somewhat limited to what you can do and how much talent would even take you seriously. But now with this new medium, I think it's really educated a population at scale.
Right. And I think the other part of it is the acceptance that, like, hey, you don't necessarily need a 30-person crew every time you're going to shoot. And I think that was the thing, like, you couldn't do it, right? It was not socially responsible. No one would have shown up. So there was a period of time when people just had to make do. And I think that aesthetic is going to persist, and I think going to permeate, because it's created a lot of visuals that are much more authentic and much more real, and not as crazy overly produced.
I'm just excited. I think finally social media is not the ugly stepchild. And, as they say, the social media manager of today will be the CMO of tomorrow. Okay, so I want to give some practical logistical advice. I think you and I are unique in a sense where we can speak from like an actual CEO standpoint and building out companies and what we've seen be successful and maybe not be successful. But I want to start when we talk about how to build your social team for the modern age. I think so many people miss this really, really important step. And with a lot of our partners, we sit down and we say, okay, before we do anything, before we talk about TikTok and Clubhouse, let's sit down and do this. And what I mean by this is establishing your goals and who you are as a brand. I like to say, what is our purpose? What is our mission? What audience are we going after? What demographic are we targeting? What is the unique proposition that we give our audience that some of our other competitors cannot? Tania, I'm blown away how many brands get this wrong or don't spend the time necessary to say, who are we? Where do we want to go? Because how do you put a social strategy together if you don't know your purpose and you don't know the audience that you really want to go after?
Yeah, look, I think a certain number of years ago, social went from something that you had to proactively choose to be on to something that you just kind of had to be on. So I think a lot of that thinking, a lot of the, how is my Instagram presence different from my TikTok, different from my YouTube, sort of fell away, because there was this concept of like, oh, I've got to be here anyway. What assets can I repurpose? Yeah. Sort of go here or there. So I think that was sort of a function of social mainstreaming, was some of that intent went away. No, but it's completely correct. And, I think the more intentional you are, I run an analytics company. So, the best time to design your KPIs is not after you're out there, right? No, but, similar to what you're saying, so much of what we encounter is catching something, if it's on the paid side after the money has been spent, and then it's like, how did it go? And you're like, okay, well, what was it trying to do? Right. And how do we think about this the right way? Because you can't judge everything in a consistent way all the time, because certain campaigns are designed to do different things. So I think, yeah, as much awareness as there is, and not only at the CMO level, but at the level of the person who is crafting the creative and publishing and making all of those decisions, like, we sometimes see there can be a disconnect between maybe some of the bigger or loftier brand goals that happen at a more senior level, and then the people who are actually implementing, they are really tasked with going and getting as many views as possible or engagement, and they're not always tying it. So it's a little bit of the spectrum, but it absolutely impacts how you perform.
Yeah, and with some of our clients too, what's interesting, especially after what's happened in our world and society over the last year, we just saw an amazing panel there on women's sports. There's a lot of brands that are trying to increase their female audience, right? Maybe they have, I mean, Twitter, I think is 80% male, 20% female, but there's a lot of brands out there that maybe lean 80-20, 90-10, and they want to increase their female audience. So guess what? They got to start posting more content that resonates with the female audience. And guess what? That may turn off some of that 90 or 80% male audience that may no longer want to follow that brand. So what I've noticed, and I'm sure you've had this proposition as well, is hey, we're okay if our net followers go down month over month. We're okay if our engagement goes down, as long as we're increasing our female demo month over month. We look at that as a win. So almost taking the short term, drop off for the long term gain. Where before, I think a few years ago, it's all about, I want more followers and I want more engagement. Like that's all everybody cared about. But now people are being a lot more strategic on what is success on a month or year over year basis.
Yeah, and I mean, I think gender is a great example. I think the other thing, tying back to pursuing brand purpose, it used to be that the safe thing to do was to be middle of the road, make everyone kind of sort of happy and offend no one, right?
Yep.
Like that was sort of the safe stance. And there were brands that bucked that trend, of course, right? The NFL's always been very ahead of the curve, and some brands like Oreo and, Audi and others. But in general, it was like, don't get political.
Right.
Not everything's Ben and Jerry's, like just sort of stay. And I think
Yep.
now, the defining characteristic of successful content and a successful social strategy is, who are you willing to alienate in order
Right.
to super serve the people that are your core? And it's rough and it's scary, right? Because to your point, it's like, yes, people want to take a stance, yes, they want to be clear on certain issues, but the idea of putting people off at scale is a scary thing. But that's a big transformation that that we've seen pretty far across the board.
Thank you for the shout out, Chris. I got the CAA Powerhouse book. I appreciate it. I still got to read the whole thing. It's a pretty big book. No, absolutely. And I think, what's so interesting about that part of it is, how you establish your goals before you think about your strategy and staffing is just so important. So what I'll say too, for all those directors of social out there, and you're leading these departments, it's really important to get the message across to your CMO, to your upper leadership. Like, guys, we're going to take some L's here for the next few months. We're trying to adjust our strategy. You're telling me that we want to get younger. You're telling me that we want to increase our diversity, maybe our Latinx or our Black community. You're telling me that you want to get, more females in our audience, or, our gender is an important thing for you. We're reversing course a little bit. We're going to kind of do some things over the next few months, and we're hoping that the long-term gain of that will be so successful, like you said, Tania, for our purpose, for our brand. But the communication of that's so important. And I know you've been on so many calls and had to explain this, and the yeah, but, and all the asterisks that go along with stats and analytics. But those are important communication tactics to have, because if your engagement is down 29% and it's all in the red, I think executives start to get scared. Like, maybe we're not doing the right thing, or we don't want to really take this risk anymore.
Yeah, I think when, the topic here is around sort of hiring the team and others, I think a big thing to note, which is something that you look for in the people that you hire, but to your point, also in terms of how you set the culture, like the tone of the culture.
Yes.
I think the biggest thing that trips up or makes life really hard for some social teams is, it's like, yes, we want to be innovative. Yes, we want to be first to do stuff, but hey, your performance always has to be number one, right? So it's, take risks, go after a new audience, but you still need to be number one. And and I think having a culture where you can say, hey guys, we're going to have a couple of sort of ugly months that you're not going to like, but here's the strategy, here's what you're doing. I think it's bravery for the team to be able to say that, but then it's also leadership setting the right tone where, that's not going to get you fired, or it's not going to get everyone freaked out. Or if you're working with an agency, it's not going to make you doubt your agency or whatnot.
Right.
Because I think setting that up so that people feel safe to have that period of time where, hey, the numbers aren't looking good. And we see that as well, right? It's like anytime you see a down month or a bad month, it's getting that context of, did you increase the KPIs that you were hoping to? And if so, then that's a win. Because, you can't always fly the plane while you're fixing it.
Yeah, exactly. And I agree. It's very hard to have record growth, record engagement, completely change your demographic of your audience, all these different things all at once.
Yeah.
It's really impossible. So I think just some advice from our standpoint is just the communication of like, here's what we're doing. Here's probably what's going to happen, just so you don't get scared at those red numbers here for a few months as we try to adjust our audience here. I want to get into width versus depth. I think when it comes to the team, and we're going to get into staffing in a second, but the FOMO, right? Like, especially Clubhouse is the new one. I think 10 million users weekly now on that platform. And, platforms come out, it seems like, and different features for platforms like Spaces and Reels and all these things we've seen come out so often that people want to be first to market. They want to jump on it. I'd love to get your thoughts on, and I know you and I have spoke about this before, about just why so many brands get hung up on this and kind of what your take is when it comes to, all right, we have a limited team, we have limited resources. When do we dive into products? How should we approach it when these things come up?
Yeah, I mean, I think the right way to approach it is to sort of split your core strategy and like your core practice from what you want to do to test out stuff that's new, but to not necessarily get distracted from it.
Yeah.
I really love, like, I think that the companies that do this the most successfully have a bit of a small bets mentality, which is like, okay, Clubhouse is interesting. We think maybe we could do this. Let's just do it, right? Let's not spend 3 months planning it.
Yes.
Like, just do a little thing, see how it goes, learn. And if it works, do a little more. If it doesn't, maybe we adjust a couple of times, and then either we step back from it and go, hey, it's not for us, or we go, something that we're doing isn't right, let's keep going. But I think, the less that is spent agonizing. Like, I'll tell you one fun story just to illustrate it. There was a pharmaceutical brand that we work with, and we've worked with for quite a few years. And it was a couple of years back when there was the announcement from Twitter that their video platform was ending, and I'm blanking on the name now, which is a terrible thing. The Vine. There we go. Yeah. The Vine was wrapping down. It's horrible.
Right? I was reading about Vine. Vine was for the culture.
Vine, right? But that announcement came out, and the team there were just devastated because they had literally just gotten an influencer series approved. It had taken them almost 18 months, right? And by the time it had gotten approved, the platform was shut down.
Yep.
So it's like speed is important, not getting too invested is important, and figuring out how to take those calculated risks. You don't want to do shiny penny syndrome where all of your focus goes to what's new, but you always want to be testing it out. And I mean, this, I'm sure in your practice too, David, where it's like when something's early, like reach is fast and free, and there's just a lot of great things. The community is more open, people aren't as jaded, so there's a lot of reasons to be on a lot of these new platforms early. And if you wait until there is the perfect best practices rule book out, then you're probably too late, at least in terms of getting the most out of the early track.
That's the one piece of advice I always say is, I know we have folks and friends from Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok on the panel and on these panels coming up, but they are boosting algorithms when they release new features. We've seen that with Instagram Reels, Spaces, etc. IGTV when it first came out. They're not going to tell you that; they'll never admit it. But they want to boost that algorithm and make sure that product or that feature is successful. So to what you just said too, I totally agree that so many people get hung up on. We need to put together a 25-page go-to-market strategy to launch to launch Clubhouse, to launch a TikTok. And, this is us, Tania and I, saying it's okay just to play in the sandbox a little bit, see if there's content on your other platforms that maybe work similar, like we see Reels versus TikTok, things like that. But I think that's where people get hung up a lot on. And I think just explaining, if we're going to have an actual strategy and we want to start posting on a brand new platform multiple times a day, that's where, when you're an employee of an organization, Tania, it's tough, right? Because your heart and soul says we should definitely like leverage this platform. But if there's only 2 of you, and your boss is expecting you to do Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, Twitter, etc., there's only so much time in the day. So being able to set proper expectations, because if you just take it on and just start working 16-hour days, then your upper management's probably going to feel like, oh, that's normal. You already run these 5, so why don't you just throw a 6th on?
Add
So I
the
know
next
that's a
7.
tough balance, for sure. So I want to also talk about leveraging your ecosystem. This is something that I don't think a lot of people think about as well. Let's look at the NFL, for example. You know, the NFL has their teams, they have their players, they have their Hall of Famers, they have past players, they have coaches, they have their partners, influencers, sponsors. If you start looking at just, I mean, the NFL has, you know, that middle circle. You start breaking it out, and there's so much distribution. I know in your world, Tanya, it's like, how can we get additional free, you know, reach and distribution? And sometimes just looking under the hood, especially with some of these, you know, Fortune 500s and some of these companies that own multiple brands in their portfolio, just being creative on how you can tap into, you know, if you're the NFL, let's tap into our Hall of Famers that have 100 million followers combined, or whatever that number is an easy way to increase your distribution if you're calculated with it.
Yeah, and just making it as likely as possible that you're stacking the deck in your favor, right? Like you can't, you know, you don't control people, so you can't necessarily, you know, make it a condition or anything. Obviously, if you're working with influencers, you can, but in this case, it's mostly just making it as easy as possible for someone to want to reshare or someone to want to sort of share stuff out to their network. I mean, it's surprising, you know, even just some of the basics of making sure that you get the handle right or things like seems so simple, but you'll see big, you know, big campaigns go out and something wasn't tagged correctly and you miss that moment. So I think setting stuff up, giving people heads up, like just making it, you know, making it, if there's any chance that they're going to do it, making it so that they have all of the resources they have at their fingertips to help you and to support you.
Absolutely. Let's get into staffing for a second, because I kind of look at it in 6 different buckets when you look at launching a social media department or you're actually trying to build a team out. And I know in sports too, let's be honest, like a lot of times they're understaffed and you're wearing 19 different hats. We get it. But the 6 buckets I have here, and I'd love to see if you agree, if there's anything I'm missing, Tanya, is execution, the people that are actually pressing play and writing the tweets. You have community management, you have ideation, analytics, paid media, parts, and then creative. So those are the 6 main buckets when you look at, all right, we're launching a new brand, or I'm trying to build out the proper, you know, staff. Now, all 6 of those don't necessarily have to be different people, but when you're looking at, if you just have one person at your brand running social media, they're doing all 6 of those things. They're ideating, they're getting in Photoshop, they're pressing play, they're running analytics, they may be doing some paid media, which is a lot for one human. But anything I'm missing there on those like 6 core buckets?
No, I think that's it. I'd say, you know, within the bucket of analytics, you've got the function of putting together the scorecards and the insights of what, and then there's sort of more of the audience development component of these are the strategies that are working. Here's some examples of best practices, like stuff that the creatives or the people pushing play can actually use. But yeah, I think those are definitely the function.
There's some people listening right now that's a one man or one woman band. Like, can I call myself the director of social, community management, ideation, creative, and analytics? Like, sure. I mean, if you're doing all of them, go for it. Ask for that raise or that title change. I did want to get your expertise real quick before we close. Is, you know, this new opt-in. I know I was flagged on iOS, Google, asking people now, do you allow access to track you outside of the app and across multiple apps? I read an article that only 4% of US users are opting in to allow these apps to track them, like an Instagram, like a Facebook. How does that change digital advertising and our ability to target our core consumer as accurate as we have before?
Yeah, I mean, look, over time, it definitely has a big impact, right? Because I think some of the really nuanced targeting that we've taken for granted will start peeling away. But it also creates opportunities for, you know, companies themselves to take their own first-party data strategy much more seriously and maybe invest in a little more, or sort of think of it as a separate work stream. Because, you know, we were chatting about this, David, but like it shouldn't be any surprise to anyone in our industry that opt-in rates are low. right? Like, I think, some of us maybe have this utopian thing of like, no, if everyone opts in, advertising will be so much more valuable and relevant. But like the consumer hates ads, right? Like they love to buy, they love to hear about new things, but the concept of opting in proactively to ads that are less bad, I think just doesn't have as big of a value prop, outside of our industry. So I think it's definitely here. It's as more and more people get that option, we'll see less and less stuff available. But again, it will mean that you need to continue to proactively know your audiences even better, and you probably can't rely on as much of the third party cues that you used to be able to.
I mean, the amount of money, Tanya, I've spent on golf clubs and sneakers during the pandemic is pretty scary. So if we can avoid me, continuing to pull the credit card out every night on the couch, I'd appreciate it. I just want to close on the staffing part of it. At the bare minimum, I think the punchline here is from Tanya and I is, if you just have, let's say, two people on your team, a social media manager and another social media manager, God forbid someone's sick, the other social media manager can hop in. You got to set time aside for true analytics, data, and looking at what's working and what's not. Again, I know this seems simple at its core, but whether that's a monthly with your full team, it's amazing, just like the A/B testing and what you'll see working. And I know for our clients too, Tanya, we'll see something that just happens to be taken off. We'll ride that wave for 2 or 3 months, and we'll see just like, I don't know, 30, 40x impressions and views just because we saw a little some of that worked. And then, Zuckerberg changes the algorithm. We have to readjust. But I think just making sure that if you are running an account, if you are a CMO and you have a small team underneath you, to just ensure that part of their KPIs is make sure you're tracking the analytics, report back to me, look at these things, because the data is going to show you your story, what your audience likes or dislikes. No different than linear television. People looked at the linear ratings and said, oh my goodness, Friends and Seinfeld, they're working really well. Let's leverage and let's monetize these platforms. But that, I know you're all about that because that's your day-to-day, Tanya, but just ensuring that you're spending a lot of time looking at the data each and every week.
Yeah, look, I completely agree. I mean, obviously, I have an analytics company, but at the same time, like I'll use this kind of soapbox for a second, which is, if you have to choose, right? Too much time is spent finding the wins, like, and not leaning into what can be better and how to improve, right? And I totally understand finding the wins is important. Everyone works incredibly hard on social, and you do want to highlight the things that went well. But the wins don't get you to what's next, right? Like the wins are impressive. The wins, in the right organization may get you a promotion, and that's cool. Promotions are cool. But like really digging into the why on stuff that isn't performing, or how can you really double down on new trends that are happening that maybe you're not leveraging. Like that's where the value in data is. It's like looking at it and going, what can I use? How can I use this to leverage what's next? I feel like if you can sort of flip the paradigm of how much time is spent talking about what you're already doing and telling a great story versus what you need to do next and how data can really inform those decisions. Like I'd love to see that flipped. It takes very special organizations to do that, and you have to do both. And I get the realities of it, but that's what I'm so passionate about, because it just if you can use data to do that, it just transforms the results that you'll get, and then you don't have to work so hard to find the wins.
Yeah, I always love learning from past mediums and media. I love looking at linear television and cable television, because if you think about it, one thing I don't think people wrap their head around is when it comes to social media, you are programming your channel for your audience. The same way that a linear television program used to do that. Let's say it's a comedy or it's NBC or what have you. They're programming their channels. They're programming their sitcoms. Like, ooh, that sitcom worked really well. What if we put this sitcom in front of it or behind it? Let's see if we can kind of leverage this content with that content. Looking at linear ratings each and every day, each and every week, moving time slots around. That's what you're doing on social media. You're constantly looking at your audience. What are they reacting to? And let's give them more of that. Let's give them less of that, and constantly reacting to how they're seeing it. I think too often it's FOMO of maybe what other people are doing or some cool trend that another competitor is doing, rather than looking inside your audience and saying, let's give the people more of what they want.
Yeah, no, exactly.
As we wrap here, what are some of the main KPIs that I know every brand's different, but some things that just across the board, across all your clients and all your partners, that you're really looking at on a regular basis to ensure performance and things are on the up and up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, beyond the stuff that's unique to the org, like tying to sales and stuff like that, I would say people will always look at the top lines, total views, total engagements, but I always encourage people to look deeply into like per creative performance. So you get a sense of how each creative is performing and whether you're winning just by clobbering people with lots of content versus content that is sort of strategically hitting its mark. So like average engagement per post, actions per post,
Yeah.
types of metrics, I think have become much more popular. And sometimes if you want to be fancy, you'll look at things like, reshares per post or things to the sense of like what's got pass along value and what's share worthy.
And also, too, what's more important, if someone likes your content or they save it? I think someone saving a piece of content on Instagram is like the most amazing engagement you can ever ask to somebody, which is awesome to look at. Well, thanks for everybody in the chat and hanging out. Tania, I know we always joke about this. We can talk for hours upon this. I think I felt bad. We just scratched the surface. Like, did people get value out of this? I hope they did. But I think we tried to hit on some of the main points, especially, like Matt said, he's the CEO. He's running all of his social media. So again, at the very worst, I know you guys are busy. You're working 16-hour days. At least change your title to director of 19 things. That way you get it all there. So Tania Yuki, always a pleasure. #Sports. Thanks so much for having us. We appreciate it. Take care.
Wonderful. Thanks, guys. Bye.